Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Voice of Authority webinar. My name is Toby Fox, and I'm the Managing Director at 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. And our job is to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. So during coronavirus, we've been doing that through this series of webinars, providing councils with a platform to discuss their ambitions, their challenges, their influences, and issues of urgency. We're a few months into running this channel now, so we thought it would be useful to revisit a few of the most popular sessions. And next week, we're going to be rewinding to the 3 sessions we presented on high street and town centre recovery to find out how far councils have achieved their objectives and what remains to be done and the implications of the dreaded second wave, which is clearly upon us. That's next Thursday at 11 AM, and you can register for it at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. But back to today, and it's clearly not Thursday. We've slipped out of our usual slot in your diaries because yesterday was the deadline for submitting responses to the government's white paper on planning. Our 2 sessions on that white paper in August were among the most popular we've run, so we're delighted to revisit this topic when Mike Kiely, chair of the Planning Officers Society, kindly agreed to share the Society's response with us today, hot off the press. And he's joined today in alphabetical order by Catriona Riddell. Not in alphabetical order. I can't even do an alphabet. My diary is messed up so much by moving from Thursday to Friday. Catriona Riddell, who's director at Catriona Riddell Associates and advisor to the County Councils Network. Dr. Janice Morphet, who's visiting professor at the Bartlett School of Planning and UCL. And Ransford Stewart, who's director of Stewart Management and Planning Solutions and founding member of the BAME Planners Network. And Sara Whelan, who is Group Manager and Development Management and Planning at Decorum Council and Policy Manager at the Planning Officers Society. So we're going to proceed in 3 stages today, viewers. We're firstly going to address what's good in the white paper, what's being recommended to be retained. And then we're going to ask what's bad and should be dropped. And finally, we're going to ask about what's been overlooked and might usefully be added. We're going to invite questions from you at each stage rather than at the end. So get your fingers on the buzzers as we turn to Mike Kiely first and ask, Mike, we've got growth areas, we've got renewal areas, we've got protected areas, we've got front loading of public involvement, we've got 30-month local plans and housing target algorithms and much more in principle. What does the Planning Officers Society deem to be good about all of that in the white paper? And is this section going to be particularly brief?
It will be briefer than the other sections, but I think the difficulty I'm having is that this is supposed to be a white paper, but it's barely a green paper. There's so little detail in it. And the thing that makes me suspicious is it promises to do everything. You know, the new system is going to be simpler, it's going to be faster. You know, the public are going to be more involved, but we're going to do it super quickly in 30 months, etc., etc. And you know, I'm just very suspicious of all of that. I suppose the one thing that I've sort of picked on or selected is that throughout the document that they're promising to simplify various sort of processes, things like the environmental impact assessments, you know, strategic environmental assessments, you know, the whole burden of evidence, if you like, in the local plan process. And you know, if they do seriously look at that and simplify it, but not undermine it, not reduce its effectiveness and you know, the important role it plays, then I think that will be a good thing. But you know, I'm sort of skeptical that they will achieve that. But that's the sort of the one thing I've sort of picked on throughout the paper that hopefully they will deliver on. And POS, you know, that we produce our manifestos, which are, if you like, think pieces that select a part of the system that could be improved or changed or whatever, in order to try and make it more efficient, to make it operate better. And you know, we're ready and waiting to work with government on that. But that was the one bit for me throughout the paper that says, yeah, you know, let's simplify this, let's make it operate better. But whether they'll achieve that or not, I'm keeping my powder dry on that one.
Excellent, thanks, Mike. Catriona, the County Councils Network, you've been advising them, I think, on the white paper. Is there any detail that you'd like to pick out of it that you'd be supportive of?
Yeah, I guess probably the one good thing that it was probably everybody was unanimous about was getting rid of the duty to cooperate, and I think pretty much everybody agrees that it just hasn't worked. It's not delivered good strategic planning outcomes. So it didn't try to fill that gap. It didn't try to answer it. It said we still need something, but we haven't got a clue basically what we need. So yeah, I jumped at the chance when the County Council Network asked me to come up with a proposition that could work, and I can talk about that a little later. But I think getting rid of the duty to cooperate, which has been very much a process-driven test that hasn't really done any local authority any good, even those that passed the duty to cooperate, I would argue, didn't necessarily end up with some good strategic planning outcomes. For me, that's actually quite a big positive. Linked to that, and I'd probably be outnumbered in this, but I actually think nationally set housing targets is a good idea. The last 10 years is the first 10 years we've not had that. Before that, we did have nationally set housing targets for as long as I can remember, at least the last 30 years before 2010. The difference is they were developed by they were set by government, but they were developed through a proper process. So they had the proper testing, they had the proper evidence. So there was proper process that sat behind it. And they were also very much linked to vision. And again, I think for me, I'll talk about that in terms of probably one of the poorest bits of the white paper in terms of its understanding of the planning system. But I actually quite like the idea of having nationally set housing targets again, if they're done properly. And I think that will take a huge amount of heat out of the system and actually it'll deliver some of the outcomes they're after, which is a quicker system, a less contentious system, but they have to get that bit right. And strategic planning has a really important role in doing that.
Fantastic, thanks, Catriona. Janice, you were nodding along to that. You agree with Catriona's points. Are there any other details that you'd like to pick out from the white paper that you'd be supportive of at Bartlett School of Planning?
Yeah, well, we've also made our own submission based particularly on research that's been done in the department. 19 of us have come together, and I think to add to the points that have already been made, I think we consider it's a good idea to have a sustainability test, although obviously the white paper is very woolly. We don't know how that's going to work, but I think we're in favour of the principle. Secondly, I think we're obviously in favour of the recognition that planning needs more resources. Again, no detail, that there should be a chief officer at the table. And when it comes to design codes, we think they're a good idea because obviously that's a big strength at the Bartlett. But actually they need to be local because we don't want a one size fits all. So I think, there are elements, but not enough detail. Just to make a personal comment, if I can, it seems to me one of the outcomes is the government will need to reflect on the fact that it's kind of listened to developers and development industry making their complaints about planning and timing and delays. But actually, I'm not sure, listening to a lot of developers in these discussions, whether really they want to have a system which is more flat rate or a common across the piece. They like negotiation. So maybe one of the outcomes is that the government will realise that the development industry, doesn't always mean what it says. It's kind of easy to make these comments, but in reality, I think we've seen a lot of rowing back on removal of Section 106, and I know we'll probably come on to that, but I think hopefully it will make the government reflect a bit more on the kind of lobbying that's made and the content of that. So that's quite a serious point I'm making, really, not a cheap point.
No, that's interesting, and there's always the danger, isn't there, of being told what you want to hear.
Exactly.
When you're looking for advice, yeah. and I remember this has happened over and over again. This is a real opportunity for government to hear, perhaps not necessarily what it wants to hear, but what the industry actually feels. So yeah, thanks, Janice. Right. Thanks. Bransford, how does that sit with the BAME Planners Network and your own experience as a planner? Is there anything else that you'd like to pick out of the white paper as being supportive of?
I think from certainly from BAME perspective, looking at the white paper is actually quite it's very easy to take almost an instant dislike to the white paper because of primarily the things that it doesn't address, rather than its proposals. I think I'd echo Mike's comments about the quality of the paper, because it is pretty much a discussion point rather than a series of properly reasoned proposals for us to really get our teeth into. So I think I must admit I struggled to find something that I thought was good about the white paper. But I think what I would say though is that actually the ambition to remodel the planning system as set out by in the introduction and the comments by the Minister and the Prime Minister, I think there's something in that I think we should actually applaud, because I think we're all mindful that the current system does have its difficulties. I think we'd all, as practitioners, we'd all accept that it's not perfect. It has suffered from being patched and botched and knocked around over a period of time. And there is it is generally a bold and ambitious move, as the Prime Minister says, to actually grasp the nettle and look at the system from scratch. That said, I think the ambition is great and should be supported. I'm not so sure about the prescriptions that come from it. I'm sure we'll go into the detail of that as we go through this session.
Plenty of time for that, Ransford. Thank you very much, Sara. So we've got the overall idea of simplifying the system, the ambition to grasp the nettle. We're positive about, and we're recommending support for the removal on the duty to cooperate, on setting national housing targets, on the sustainability test, more resources for planning and design codes. Is there anything else you'd like to pick out of the paper?
Yeah, I think the positive that I would take away from it is the fact that it does briefly recognise at the very beginning the amazing job the public sector has done throughout the pandemic over the last 6 or 7 months. And I think that was kind of very well said in the kind of very beginning introductions. It was brief. But I think it's then also knowing that it is trying to take advantage of what's happened throughout COVID in different communication styles, and been able to think about the kind of silver linings throughout this terrible pandemic, that, people are now, local authorities not having to use press notices or site notices if they cannot do it. And I think government are really kind of keen to be able to build on that, which is a positive. It's been able to know that local authorities will have to work in different ways and be able to engage with communities in different ways. And there'll be, different kind of costs associated with that. But it's been able to take advantage of what I feel has been quite a strong community network that's built throughout the last kind of 6, 8, 9 months, and been able to kind of really kind of ride on that position within the communities. And exactly what Janice was saying, it has brought us all together as a industry to talk about what's good in the planning system and what is not good in the planning system. And I think the amount of webinars, the amount of interaction that we've all had over the last kind of few months has been fantastic. And I have been very surprised at what I've heard as well from the development industry, to be able to say that they do like that wrangling between the local authority, the community and themselves. And that's come out quite a few times. I think also it's positive around the highlighting the technology and how we can really use digital technology better in the planning system. And that has to be done. And I think without a bit of a stick, it maybe wouldn't be a top priority of local authorities and leaders, etc., and chief execs. So I think knowing that that's going to cost money and it's going to need resources, etc., I think making that a clear priority is a positive, and it will be a shift in terms of communities and in terms of leadership within local authorities, because many are concerned about going in a more digital route. So I think that's a real positive, and it will really start opening up the data that we do have in local authorities, which is plentiful. I think another positive is actually highlighting that once a site is allocated in the plan making, the principle of housing is then kind of agreed and is done. And I don't really know exactly what they mean by granting outline permission. I don't think they mean a traditional outline consent. However, I think really highlighting that point is really key, because you do very often get communities who are still objecting to the principle of development. They're incredibly concerned about, especially when it's greenfield release, and they really do not want it to happen. And it's just been able to know that I think if local members, local authorities really kind of have that weight of a decision at that point, which they definitely do. But I think the community, being able to kind of really encourage the community to engage at that local plan stage would be a positive. So I think it's a lot of questions as to how that happens. And in my opinion, it still needs that equal communication at the technical details stage. And another positive is the mention of planning enforcement, because it never really gets mentioned. So I think that's a real positive to kind of highlight. Again, it's the last question, it's the last point, but I think it's a positive to be able to say that that's kind of coming through. There's pros and cons in all of it. So whereas they've mentioned planning enforcement, they haven't mentioned minerals and waste, etc. But I think those kind of aspects that have come through, but I think the main positive is that it's opened up the conversation, and it's kind of now having a detailed conversation. But that is me having good faith that actually what is in the planning white paper will have quite detailed consultation afterwards as well, because what's in there right now is not something that you can roll out in the next kind of year and a half. So
fantastic. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Viewers, we're going to ask you in a second how well your views are being reflected by our panel. So a poll's going to appear on your screens, and we look forward to your responses. If you have additions to make to this conversation, to the positive aspects of the white paper, we'd encourage you to share those through the chat function. There's a question come in, panel, from Steve Barton at Ealing Council, and without sort of trying to overlap with the rest of the session today, can you respond to this, Mike? What are the implications for strategic planning, particularly non-statutory joint planning frameworks? Do you see them having a major role in the future, especially given the time and resources required to prepare a statutory joint plan, and what geographies matter?
The first point I was going to make in response to the next question is the big hole in the white paper is strategic planning, both in terms of the process that they've set out, in terms of the three areas and sort of front loading the system, but also, as Catriona has touched on, this substitute or this replacement for the duty to cooperate. And also, if you look at the nationally set sort of housing targets, what we've seen is the policy off position that Litchfields have calculated for us produces, frankly, a load of nonsense, ridiculous numbers, particularly in London and the southeast, and actually a reduction in the north, where government is looking to sort of level out. So, getting the policy on version of that will require this sort of joint working, strategic planning, etc. So, I think I'm not going to say much more, because Catriona is far more eloquent in this area than I am. Without a proper process of working across boundaries, having that sort of national strategy and then those regional strategies where you can decide how you allocate growth, etc., that you're actually looking to provide housing in terms of both the demographic needs and the economic needs of the area. Get rid of this nonsense that building more houses will reduce house prices. There's no evidence at all for that. What you're talking about is land. Land sets the price. The house builders look at what houses are being sold for in an area. They will then do their residual calculations, etc., and then they will purchase land. And then when they build out, they are almost locked into those existing house prices. That's the way that market works. And when house prices have reduced, it's been in response to the availability of money to buy houses, because mortgages are restricted, generally in the context of some other economic or financial crash. So, it's a very, very different market. And there's Janice's colleagues have produced some wonderful publications that explains all this far better than I can do. So I think, yes, strategic planning, joint working will be necessary, but that's a massive hole in the white paper.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Catriona, did you want to come in on that? And also, Peter Everston's raised the question as well about how government can set local authority housing targets. I mean, how actually is that going to work? You think national targets are a good idea, but what about the nitty gritty of that?
Yeah, I mean, in answer to Steve's question, I think the last 10 years, in the absence of anything really formal from government, we've had a huge organic growth of really good practice in strategic planning across a lot of areas outside the statutory planning system. And, you know, Steve's involved in the area around Heathrow, and we've seen some really strong collaboration around non-statutory strategic planning frameworks as a result of this. One of the beauties of this is the fact that these reflect much more the fact that planning, the statutory planning system, is part of the answer to supporting long-term sustainable growth, but they're not the only answer. So we've had the emergence of a lot of growth boards who've had much wider roles in terms of not just planning, but in terms of economic development, climate change, infrastructure, managing health and well-being. You know, they've been about, I always say strategic planning's the ringmaster of sustainable growth, because it's the bit that brings all these things together. And actually the non-statutory frameworks that Steve's mentioned, I think, have been far more valuable. They've been quicker to prepare, they've been far more collaborative, they've been less scary, and they've been far more visionary. They've been about trying to transform areas over long-term periods. So, you know, taking some of the heat out of the politics of it. So I think certainly in the County Council Network report I've done in the proposition there, I've suggested that that is the direction of travel for strategic planning, not fitting it directly within the statutory planning system. As for the housing numbers, I was involved in 2 previous systems before the current system, and as I said earlier, the housing numbers were set nationally. So with structure plans, they were set by government through regional planning guidance, and in the regional spatial strategy process, they were still set by government, but they were informed by the regional assemblies. But they were national figures, and they were set by government. They were government dictated targets, but they were informed by very strong process underneath it. So if many of you remember, in the Southeast body called SERPLAN, it was a collaboration of local authorities. They pulled together a lot of the evidence, they pulled together the draft, they worked very closely with all the local authorities around what housing numbers should look like, what the distribution of growth should be, but they were based on vision across the area. And the same way the regional spatial strategies, the first point was to look at the vision for these areas, where the growth should be, where the areas to be protected should be, where the regeneration should be. And they were very much formed from the bottom up.
Yeah.
To deliver the national targets. So we know it can be done. I think the difference this time round is we don't know what the process the government is proposing between the stage 1 standard methodology figures and the final figures. So we have no idea how they're going to get from A to B and what will inform that process. So again, the County Council Network proposition that I've prepared is looking at strategic planning advisory bodies. So they would be collaborations of different organisations and local authorities. So I would say growth boards are absolute perfect for that role, and they would be the ones that would do the distribution of growth, test the different options, the spatial options, look at where the infrastructure is going and all the different facets of good sustainable growth, and then they would advise government on the numbers at the end of the day. So I mean, it can be done, and it is actually it does take a huge amount of heat out of the whole process and means you can deliver local plans quicker.
Yeah, I think I mean, there's an interesting aspect to this. It's very easy to criticise the white paper for lack of detail, but that lack of detail has created a great deal of conversation, and there are a lot of ideas that are coming out of this. Sara, did you want to pick up on either on strategic planning, on setting national targets, and also perhaps you'd like to unpick a little what you were saying about developers enjoying or appreciating the process of negotiation? Why is it that they're telling you that that's the case? What's the why do they like negotiating?
Well, I'll take the first point first. So in terms of having the national set kind of targets, I think that could work, and I'm supportive of that if we have a national plan. And I think, you know, it really, really, really is important. And I just don't really see how it could ever work without it. And I mean, the way Catriona's explained it is basically with a national plan in my mind, so that whoever is on various growth boards, etc., kind of get together, because you just hear snippets of facts. I think I heard something the other day that, you know, 80% of the apples in England are grown in Kent. And you just think, well, actually, let's make sure that Kent doesn't release, you know, its agricultural land for its housing, etc., you know, to an extremity that you've kind of really kind of, you know, got rid of something that's really nationally important. And it's then just knowing that, you know, the Northeast, etc., has got all the ports, and it's just been able to really think as a country, as you would a kind of a plan of action, to be able to know what is important in each area. And, you know, the top 10 tourist items that we've got across the country, really kind of supporting those and supporting those within an area. So I think a national plan has to be the way forward. And I think from a government point of view, I know it would be hard work and it would be challenging, but it would also answer questions around levelling up. It would, you know, be able to kind of do a lot of items that need to be done. And I think the thing we haven't mentioned yet is the recovery and devolution white paper. So obviously that's now kind of been put on pause, etc., and hold until the new year or whenever, and whatever happens, you know, there's various media snippets that come out. But I think that document will be a real kind of interrelated document into the planning white paper. And I think knowing what happens around kind of local authorities, or whether it's larger local authorities and going into unitaries, etc., but knowing where they will stand with the national plan. Because as much as the R word of the regional kind of planning was not supported, local members really quite enjoyed having that kind of target put upon them in a way, because they could wrangle between each other, and then they could say, sorry, community, we've done the best we can. This is our housing numbers now. Let's work with it and let's work for it, kind of thing, rather than having to kind of come up with a different approach. So I think a national plan is the way forward in answering that question. In terms of the developers enjoying the negotiation, I don't know, developers might be listening to this thinking, oh, but it came across as a real kind of positive when we were discussing the design codes. And, you know, in particular, that conversation, so from, in my opinion, and their kind of POS opinion, is very much that design codes should be done with a developer and the community, and they should be setting out the visions on both sides. And we've published a paper which Mike has drafted very much around how a design authority could look. And it's been able to kind of put design at the centre, but the community input is so valuable. And I think being able to know that developers, they want to have a good reputation in the community. They want to be able to build out over 6 years or 10 years and not have, you know, real confrontation throughout all of that time, whether it's with local members or leaders or the community or the kind of local community activist groups. And I think being able to know that then, you know, their kind of house building name, when they come across to the other side of the borough or they go across to a local authority next door, etc., has a positive reputation. Their kind of business model is not to retain in a place, and it is to dispose of their housing product, but their reputation goes with them. So I think it may be something around that, but I think it's just been able to know that each site in their mind probably does have a very different response. And in some places they may feel, well, actually, we'll try and, you know, really kind of push it here and reduce the amount of affordable housing, or we can't get the amount of open space, but we need to do it because of this, etc. But if we do it, then can we really innovate? Can we think of different ways? And I think the whole industry, the other thing we haven't mentioned yet is sustainability and responding to the climate change agenda. And I think house builders are having to take that very, very seriously, because they need to get ahead of the curve. They will need different supply chains. They will need different methods of construction. And they will need to work with the community to be able to see what that looks like. And the community are the best people to be able to answer the questions to, you know, what your landscape strategy should be like, because they walk around the area, they know the areas, you know, what your kind of green spaces should do. And I think if they can get that right, then they've got a better product, and that will then kind of pursue them going forward. So I think possibly it's really kind of using that local knowledge for a positive for them, for profit maybe, you know, in that kind of a business model. But it did come out in quite a few of the sessions I listened to. Janice, is that echoed in your conversations with developers as well? And also, would you like to pick up on any of these threads, the idea of the national plan of sustainability being woven into planning?
Well, just on the first point about developers, it just seems to me that the development industry in this country is based on negotiation. And when you get uncertainty, and there have been some press stories this week, which is a bit surprising because it's been the case all the way through the white paper consultation, is if you're moving to a new system, the development industry will pause because it wants to know how it's going to affect it. So my view from the outset has been that the development industry will probably focus on those sites which are maybe have been affected by the change in the use classes order, where they have a more certain kind of outcome. They know what they're doing, and they'll wait. So I think although developers often say, in my experience, when I was a planning officer or in charge of planning a long time ago, But I always used to find that those negotiations were often stalled by the applicant, because the promoter of the scheme was perhaps managing the value of the site or managing the value of the consent around their, annual reporting, their profits, and so on. So sometimes, developers actually want planning consents for reasons other than development, and I don't think we kind of understand that way in which planning fits in this country, particularly to broader company strategies and accountancy kind of practices around the use of capital. So I think that's important. I definitely agree that a national planning framework is required, or national plan, and I had that in my list of things that have been overlooked. And the other thing in terms of sustainability, and also in my overlooked list, is there's absolutely no mention of the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
And if we look, say, at planning in other countries, whether that's in Ireland or Australia, we're looking at other European states, in France and so on, the SDGs are absolutely now shaping the way planning is going. I mean, planning is not the only element of delivering the Sustainable Development Goals, but nevertheless, we've signed up to deliver them, the government signed up. And yet in government, although the ONS has got some reporting, generally the SDGs are seen as something that happens in other countries and not here. It was in DFID. So I do think that we've missed a chance there to, if you like, at least indicate which of the elements of the white paper would meet or contribute towards meeting particular SDGs. And I think the next iteration should take that much more on board, personally.
Fantastic, Janice, thanks. I'm riding roughshod over our original plan to start with positive, then do negative, and then innovations. But the conversation is good, and there's lots of ideas coming out. And most importantly of all, the viewers are being provoked into action. We're getting lots of questions and lots of chat coming through. So let's keep going on this course. Ransford, how does the BAME Planners Network respond on in terms of strategic planning, in terms of setting targets nationally? And are there any of the other threads of the conversation you'd like to pick up on? And on top of that, I'm going to throw in another question. We've got a viewer, Andy Sage, who's asking, is there any good news for community-led housing projects in the white paper?
Right. From as far as the housing numbers debate is concerned, I think I'd echo the Catriona's comments in respect of the national plan and targets. That as we said, we've been this route before with Plan and other regional planning bodies, and we know how to work within that system, and it does take a lot of the sting out of the debates that have to be had with communities when those numbers come through, and the conversation is then much more targeted and much more focused and realistic in terms of the community's aspirations and understanding of their own areas. And it's a proper conversation that people can get involved in without that's properly focused on the realities, rather than these very sort of high level numbers, which probably don't mean a great deal to communities. I think the other strand I'd just like to pick up on is the issue about developer negotiations, and I think it's I think one of the difficulties of our current systems, it does tend to paint developers into a corner of characterization of being sort of the evil developer who's trying to rip the guts out of any development scheme and maximize profits at the expense of communities. And certainly my experience is that that isn't necessarily the case. Most developers are very conscious that their developments have to sit within a community, and the communities should be satisfied or content that the development has responded in some way to the community's needs. Now, I think the more that we have standardized approaches to developer contributions, to SIL and Section 106, the more we take away that debate from out of the hands of communities and developers, who often have very similar aspirations. And while the communities may well be looking to the developments for benefits for their communities, the developer is similarly doing the same, because if they're making contributions towards community infrastructure. They want to see these things actually happen, and they want to see their future residents be the beneficiaries of that development, that contribution. And I think the more we start moving towards these standardized approaches, the more we kind of break that link between a development, the community, and the benefit. So I think that, yeah, so that's what the main thrust of my response. In terms of the BAME communities, I think that's again the ability to benefit from developer contributions. I think many communities are very attuned to this, and they're looking to see where those development contributions are spent, where they're realised, and how they can take advantage of that. And again, that link between developments and benefits, I think, is becoming more and more strained. So I have some real concerns about that in terms of the impact for BAME communities.
Thank you, Ransford. Mike, let's move that on then to the negatives about the white paper, and let's outright talk about what Planning Officers Society is recommending is stripped out of the white paper. What should go?
Well, I could talk for the rest of the day on that one, so I'll just pick three. The first we've sort of touched on already, and I was going to leave Catriona to major on it, which is the big hole, which is strategic planning in the white paper proposals. The other two is the sort of local plans process, and particularly the sort of front loading of that. And then the second and the third one was the infrastructure levy section 106 proposal. So in terms of the front loading, if you like, the local plan process, good in theory, but the way government has articulated it is that we have these growth areas, and to some degree the protected, renewal areas, where as far as you can, essentially is the strategy. You will give as much permission and give as much detail as possible. And the trouble with that is, picking really up on what Sara says, is that, in my experience, the idea that the local planning authority can go into that level of detail, at a very early stage, and in some cases where there isn't a developer on board, you may be allocating a greenfield site and there may not be a developer, just a landowner, I think is completely and utterly misplaced and actually quite arrogant. Why should the local planning authority think that they're that they're going to design this space? That's the role of the architect, their other advisors, and the developers. And in my experience, where you work properly and well with good architects, good developers, you get something that you didn't necessarily anticipate, and actually the architect didn't necessarily anticipate, that's really quite innovative and quite special. And if we strip that out of our system, there's a real danger that we will produce, mediocre, safe rubbish. And a really good planning system is about taking those risks, working together, pushing each other to try and get the best out of each side. Our job as planners is to make sure that those architects and developers and designers have a good brief, a good spatial brief, and to get their clients to think properly about their brief. So the idea that you do all this work potentially abortively is I think just crazy and wrong. And the idea that you can do it in 30 months, well, whoever wrote that has never worked in the system. This is a phenomenal amount of extra work. The other thing that's sort of worrying me is that the term design codes has been thrown around, and I wonder if any of these people have ever written a design code and know what it is. The notion that you can have a national design code is just complete and utter rubbish. That you might be able to have a national design guide, but a code, in my experience, is we do use design codes, particularly where you've got parameter-based outline applications, generally where there's an environmental impact assessment, and you've got to discharge those duties, and often where you've got, say, heritage assets or other important aspects, you've got to make sure in granting that outline consent that the development will produce the goods. because you've got a duty under the Act to do that for the conservation areas and listed buildings, and you've got other responsibilities under the environmental impact regulations to say that this will be fine for the whole range of issues that you're testing it against. And that's what the parameter-based approach and the design codes that are, their role is to make sure that when the details come forward, there's a process in place that ensures that they respond to their context and that they produce the right level of quality. And that's what a design code is. It's very specific to a place or to a town centre or whatever it might be. Yes, you could produce instructions on how you do that nationally, but the notion that government will produce a national design code, I haven't got a clue what that would look like, you know. So that's a real worry for me. And that we're expected to produce this sort of, you know, binary, you know, planning system says yes, planning system, yeah, is this going to be a presumption against development that's not in the plan? That to me is wrong. You know, we need to, planning needs to do as much work as it needs to do, but no more than that, in order to create the space for innovation to happen. You know, what we do is fundamentally a creative thing. You know, the art of town planning is creative, and we've got to ensure that those you know, fantastic architects, other designers, you know, urban designers, landscape architects, etc., have the space to do the wonderful work that they often do. And you know, most developers, particularly in London, you know, the good quality developers want to do good work. You know, Tony Pidgley, God rest his soul, has spent the last decade, if not more, producing his legacy, you know, and he's done phenomenal work. I was thinking particularly of the site in Kidbrooke, the Ferrier estate, which I used to live just down the road from it. A dreadful thing, and it's now completely transformed. You know, really good quality design work. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they are generally trying to do good work. I don't see these proposals enhancing that. I see them closing it down and making it less likely to happen, and also requiring a local planning authority to do a significant amount of work, some of which is going to be completely abortive. Yeah,
point well made, Mike. So we got the front loading of the local plan, the 30-month target, the infrastructure levy, and the idea of a national design code. Ransford, is there anything else that
I haven't touched on the infrastructure levy?
Well, we've got to give everyone a shout, okay. But I suspect the infrastructure levy might come up with one of the other panelists. We'll see.
Okay.
Ransford, you were quite keen to get on to the what should be stripped out of the white paper when we started this session. So let's give you the stage. What do you think should be dropped?
Well, I have to say that the whole concept of the growth, renewal, and protected areas designated through the local plan gives me real sort of cause for concern. Because it doesn't really feel like a simpler, more certain planning system, to my mind, in terms of how do you actually get to that point. And to be honest, it sounds more like a Victorian railway ticket system, if anything. My concern is that, in particular, the impacts of those designations on the communities that we serve, and in particular, BAME communities. I think that it's as Mike was saying, the expectation that you'll be able to resolve these in 30 months is completely unrealistic. And I think the concern is that the result of that is that more inappropriate and poor development is likely to be focused on those areas where more disadvantaged communities already exist. And basically these the inequalities in the system already will become just even more firmly baked in. I see it becoming a system that acts to prevent BAME communities and less advantaged communities from taking full part in the system. I think the process kind of shifts a lot of the tension and conflicts within the planning system up to the local plans level, which I think is not particularly helpful. And the prospect of potentially restricting consultation with local communities at the development management level, again, is another concern, because it is the area where traditionally communities are best able to act within the system. So, you know, I feel that none of these the aspects of the zonal system that are being promoted at the moment give me any real confidence that this will be a recipe for a simpler, faster, and more predictable system. And I think actually what it may well deliver is a more fragmented and more unequal system for local communities.
Great, Renzo. Thank you, Janice. Would you also like to see the zonal system dropped from the white paper? And is there anything else that you'd like to see stripped out?
Well, personally, I can remember when I first started in planning, we still had the initial development plan, so we still had zones. I'm just so old, but nevertheless, I think, you know, there are lots of issues about zones that we have to remember, and they were pretty inflexible, and that's why they were reformed after the review in 1965, you know, into the 68 Act and the 70 development plan approach. So, you know, whatever unintended consequences, I think, are the things that have not been examined in this white paper at all. And, you know, it hasn't been risk assessed. People haven't gone to the edge and looked over and thought, well, if you really do this, what might happen, like the delay because of the changes in Section 106. Just to pick up one other point that is in our response from the Bartlett, is that we're definitely against the fast track for beauty. The reason for that is that we're concerned, and this is particularly my colleagues, Matthew Carmona and Ben Clifford, are particularly concerned that this is really just an extension of PD rights against some kind of national rubric. And it may lead again to unintended consequences around sites being redeveloped or buildings not being repurposed, not a very sustainable approach. It seems a bit simplistic, a bit crude in our view. And yet, you know, it could also lead to, if you like, cosmetic additions to buildings, like to make them look more traditional or whatever. And of course, we all know that, you know, good design is what works in a particular place. It takes account of plot size and, you know, scale, local vernacular, what feels comfortable. And so we're a bit concerned about this being another tick box approach, which actually may just lead to, as I say, not really, or just an extension of PD without then, you know, all the attendant problems that might bring. So that's a Bartlett view.
Thanks, Janice. Catriona, what would the County Councils network add anything else to that list?
The most disappointing thing about the whole approach to the white paper was that it felt like a bunch of disparate views by different people. It didn't add up to a coherent framework for planning for growth, and given, you know, that we already knew the huge challenges around climate change, and we've got, as Sara said, we've got huge challenges around the economic recovery, the immediate economic recovery, as well as how we manage growth sustainably in the long term. And the government said it's a bit about clean growth, green growth, and that is the priority. There's no mention of minerals and waste anywhere in the white paper, and that is such a vital part of the planning system. So for me, it's we need integration right from the very top. We need government to stop working in silos in their own departments. You know, putting a housing team in Department of Transport is not the same as having a team that works pan department, and that needs to happen at local authorities as well. That needs to happen across local authorities and through the different tiers. And, you know, there's still huge challenges in two-tiered areas, which cover a very large amount of the country for now anyway, you know, in terms of the different roles around infrastructure delivery, around the minerals or waste. And we've not got a system in the white paper that for me is about dealing with the really big challenges this country faces around climate change, around the economic recovery and long-term growth, around health and well-being, the ageing population, how we manage technology changes over time, and that really important geographical emphasis around levelling up areas of disparity, maximising the benefits of places like the Oxford-Cambridge arc. So for me, it's just not a coherent framework. It just doesn't add up to a coherent framework. And if you were going to start with a new system, you certainly wouldn't start with throwing a whole load of proposals in there. as for growth, renewal and sort of protected areas, we've always had them to a certain element. They've not been zones, and I think there's some real confusion in the white paper about is it a zone, is it not a zone, and they should just be honest about it, or maybe they don't know what they actually meant in proposing it. So for me, if you're talking about the gaps, it's about it's not an integrated system, it's not a systemic approach, and I don't think anybody mentioned in any of the white paper anything about vision. You know, this is, I think Mike said, this is about placemaking. This is about making good places and making good communities, and doing the best we can for the people and the economy and the environment in this country. And that needs vision, whether you're talking about a national vision through a national plan, whether you're talking about a local vision or even a neighbourhood vision. There is nothing in that white paper that says to me this is about doing something, knowing where we're going, setting a direction of travel and setting out the route map to get there.
Thanks, Catriona. Sara, over to you. What do you think, or what are you recommending should be dropped from the white paper? And are you going to mention the infrastructure levy?
Yes, I will. So in terms of SIL, I mean, you can read it. Somebody's helpfully put our response, our POS response in there. But generally, we're surprised it's on development value. So it should really be on the uplift value, because you know, that could ruin viability on some sites. So I'll go through this briefly. But in terms of the viability question, having a national set SIL, there's some areas that cannot afford to charge SIL. You know, they cannot afford SIL because of viability. So it's not taking account of any of that. I think the valuation post application and then kind of post construction is going to be a real challenge in local authorities. And I think, you know, wrangling with that in terms of the art of a viability appraisal, for example, you know, there's going to be so many different factors that kind of go into that. So I think that's just not going to work. And it's just going to be hard work, and it's going to be a real challenge. And, you know, you've got years and years and years that you're kind of talking about building out some sites. So I think the other point that we make in the response as well is that developers sometimes pay too much for land. So it's just knowing that, you know, the NPPF is quite clear now that can't happen, but we don't want to start going back into a system that may allow for that. And I think that's a real risk. So I think we want to make sure that that restraint and not paying too much for land is kind of retained, and, you know, any kind of approach of any changes to SIL kind of keeps that. The other thing is the Section 106 and removing Section 106 just will not work. You know, there's so many things that and this whole kind of wrangling with the community, I shouldn't use that word wrangling, I should think of a better word, but that kind of engagement, discussion, you know, is where the good stuff comes out, you know, because the developer won't come along and think, do you know what, we really need to build this or improve something else, or we need to kind of put some more wayfinding in, or we need to kind of do a notice board, they wanted it for years, or whatever it is. And that non-financial Section 106 kind of heads of terms, you know, what happens to that? You know, so those non-financial items, where do they go? And the fact that, you know, some pieces of infrastructure are so specific to a site that, you know, how do you kind of work that without a Section 106? So it just will not work. So I just think it's kind of, you know, trying to be positive and, you know, being kind of open to suggestions. And I think really we would really appreciate talking to government on that as kind of planning officer society, because it becomes a fact of, you know, something that is so technical in the day-to-day world and how it really works on the front line, and being able to know that, you know, we can kind of talk through a different approach, but it's been able to have that kind of real experience. So I think we'd really appreciate a conversation on that. I think the other aspects of the paper that will not work is there's no mention really about any non-residential uses. And I understand that government is all about housing. And I think it's just been able to know that we will not meet the objectives of the planning white paper of sustainable mixed communities. We will not meet, you know, climate change kind of aspirations, etc., going forward without that kind of mix of uses, you know, without the kind of employment space, without the jobs, without that kind of community hub. And there's a lot of kind of really good thinking around those 20-minute walkable neighbourhoods, considering the response from COVID-19, and many people are working from home but want to go out for the local hotspots to work rather than being at home all the whole time. And I think, you know, more approach like that we may well see kind of coming forward in the future, but it needs shops, it needs kind of employment areas, it needs kind of community spaces, it needs a playgroup area, it needs a nursery, it needs a kind of park, it needs that item. And I think the other thing in terms of well-being and health of communities is so important, like Catriona mentioned. And I think mental health now is going to be, you know, so much more important. So in terms of being able to bring kind of green infrastructure into towns and cities, you know, you need to kind of really plan for that, and it's just not mentioned. So I think that it just will not work in terms of not having a kind of priority for non-residential uses. I think I completely agree, you know, the approach of speed over design. And I can see, especially in my role as head of DM, that if we're under pressure to be able to know that we may get a refund on a site if something's allowed or an appeal, etc., how can I manage my budget? You know, how can I really plan as a local authority to deliver everything that's in the planning white paper, whilst I know that we may refuse an application on design or on some other aspect, and it might be allowed an appeal, and then that fee goes back to a kind of applicant. And it's just the other approach around the algorithm policies, I think, could have real unintended consequences of refusing a lot of applications, because we've spoken quite a lot today about that negotiation aspect of planning, and when you put in a computer says this and not, I think quite a lot of applications will get refused. I think
the unintended consequences might well be negative rather than positive. I'm just gonna cut in now and just rewind to a couple of those things. One is it's been mentioned a couple of times now, the importance of recovery of high streets, of what's going to happen to our town centres. My colleague Finn has put in the chat a link to next week's discussion, which is going to focus exactly on that. So if you'd like to join that, click on that link and register. And I think it's probably worth, let's be generous and make a couple of points. One on the fact that I think it was Janice mentioned there's no risk assessment around any of this, but that's clearly a policy. You know, there are a number of things happening that the government has instigated. There's one coming up just after Christmas that we're all very well aware of, where the unintended consequences are being assumed to be largely or somewhat positive rather than negative. And being generous, this idea of trying things out is, you know, it can be positive. The consequences might be positive. And the other idea I wanted to mention was that perhaps what we're dealing with here is just a misnomer. It's the idea that this is a white paper that is so confusing, because it's actually a discussion point. We've got some great ideas coming out. There's some really interesting thinking and a general agreement that lots needs to be done. So perhaps if it wasn't called a white paper, there'd be a lot less negativity and a lot more positivity about what's coming out of this. And I'm going to feed that back into the conversation, along with a request for one or two innovations, new ideas, things that should have been in the white paper that weren't, or that you'd like to see in the white paper, starting with Mike. What's the Planning Officers Society recommending?
Where to start? I think I briefly sort of touch on three areas. I think the big worry for me in the white paper is governments, I think, disingenuously saying that the community will be engaged in the process, but when you unpack it, they're not. You know, and if we are moving to a system where consents and hard decisions are being front loaded, it's going to be vital that the community is involved, because at the moment they do get that second bite of the cherry through the DM process. So I think government has been very disingenuous in the way they've set that out. And as I say, when you unpack it, you can see, and we've set this out in some detail in our response. The second for me is that it is about, from government's point of view, it is about delivering housing, and you know, we've touched on the statistics over the last decade. About 1 million planning permissions for homes have not been implemented, and POS put forward several years ago changes to the CPO process that could make that a much better tool for unlocking stalled housing sites or land banking, or whatever you want to call it. And we would urge government to look at that manifesto. It's on our website. It's the 7th one in the series of how you can have a simpler process, housing sites not coming forward being the reason to get the CPO, and that you could have a compulsory selling order where the council doesn't have to buy the land, which is the biggest problem in the current sort of process, and where all the complexity lies, because you have to have a back-to-back agreement with the person who is going to buy the land. So if you can just force the land to be sold in the market, you can partner with your favourite developers or your own council's development arm, and bring those sites into the market. Now the reality is that would change the nature of the game, and those sites probably would get developed. So that's the second one. And the third is I just think there's a lot we can do in terms of the local plan process, and what we've urged government, and again there's a manifesto on this, it's the 9th in the series, is that you should have a different process for the strategic part of the plan to the detail part of the plan. The strategic and the strategy, that should have a fairly long shelf life. If it's a half decent strategy, it should last, and otherwise it's probably not a strategy, and that should be subject to all that testing, the legal test or the sustainability test, etc. But the details, the detailed policies, they could have a much lighter touch process. And what we're suggesting is that it should be a little bit like it used to be, that the issues are only examined at appeal if there's outstanding objections. Yeah. So if you produce your suite of DM policies and there's no objections, the council can just stop it. What's wrong with that? If there are outstanding objections, then pins are involved. So those would be the we would suggest.
Really straightforward, lovely, great ideas. Janice, you've been nodding. You agree with those? Anything? Any other ideas you'd like to add?
Yes, I mean, we think it's a great shame that the white paper still only deals in market housing, and although we've had a bit of a shift in the NPPF 2019 towards looking at other needs, that really the national assessments and the local plans themselves do not look at any other type of housing or other tenures. And actually, if you were looking at housing need at the local authority level, market housing is part of it, but there's so many more aspects of housing need that planning can contribute towards. And so we think that perhaps a change in use classes order to include all types of housing would be one mechanism for being more granular. And then associated with this, an indication in the plan about how many sites or which sites should actually be used for different types of housing, whether that's for older people, say near town centres, whether that's for social and affordable housing and so on. And we just really seem to have the same old approach where, you can't do anything with your local plan except provide market housing in practice. Yeah. So we think that's something that's been overlooked.
Great stuff. Thanks, Janice. Ransford, what's the BAME Planners Network recommending is added to the white paper?
The gaping hole for as far as the BAME Planners Network is concerned is the simple lack of reference to anything specific to the BAME communities. There's no real assessment of how these proposals could impact on BAME communities. I think it's to a great extent. I think it stems from the analysis of the issues that the paper is aimed at. There's no real sort of equality and justice dimension to the proposals or the foundations of what's being considered. So it's a matter of concern from our point of view that the only invitation to address the impacts for BAME communities is in the question at the question 26, right at the end of the white paper, which invites comments on impacts on protected characteristics, and it really feels like an afterthought. It's not something that that's been placed front and centre of the white paper in the way that we would expect, given the particularly this year, given the impacts of coronavirus, things that are happening on the streets of the UK and the US, and the real greater understanding of the impacts of how we live and how we use our urban spaces and how that affects BAME communities differentially. So that would be a real matter of, well, we have made that the focus of our response to the white paper. Yeah,
it's the inequality of impacts of some of those perhaps unintended consequences has never been clearer than this year, Ransford. Thank you. Sara, what are your innovations? We've already got a clear idea of some of them, but are there any others that you'd like to add?
Just two. So one's already been mentioned, which is around the kind of climate change targets. And I completely agree with Janice about including the sustainability delivery goals, the SDG goals. And I think we've spoken as well, Catriona, Mike and myself at POS events around the sustainability test needs to be outside of local authority planners, because it's not just the local plan that can deliver on this. So maybe it's something that there's a corporate sustainability test for all local authorities, for county councils, etc., so that it's got that corporate heart. And then the planning system is a angle to be able to deliver it, as is building regulations, as is something else, as is the kind of the entire corporate approach. So it's the same as placemaking should be at the heart of every top table, social climate change. And I think the longer kind of time goes in, the more higher priority it becomes in my mind personally. So I think that's the one thing that I think hasn't been given justice in this. And I think the second thing is around Steve Barton's point in the comments. Very much when this was released, first of all, due to be a couple of weeks apart from the devolution white paper, what is the role for local members? If I was a ward member right now, I would feel very undecided as to kind of what my role would be going forward. So I think that is a real kind of again, it's an unintended consequence about the delays between them, but you need to see them together, because otherwise you do not know how the system would be carried forward. So I think it's a really valid point. So there'll be my two: climate change and ward members. Again, really clear, and these things don't sound, none of these sound particularly controversial to me. These are just clear, sensible, straightforward ideas. Viewers, I'm going to ask you how well the panel is reflecting your views on what should go into the white paper, and perhaps you'd like to share some of your ideas through the chat as well, while we turn to Catriona and ask what the County Councils Network would like to see added to the white paper. What are your recommendations there, Catriona?
Thanks. Yeah, well, my recommendations to CCN were really a reflection of some of the things we've already discussed. It was about taking a systemic approach to sustainable growth, and in which the planning system plays a really important role. And it's sort of four main proposals. One is, again, reflecting what Sara just said, is at the heart of this that new sustainability powers are given to all local authorities. And that is linked very much to a very strong definition of what sustainable development is at a national level, and reflected in what the government does. And then that is taken forward through integrated strategic frameworks, which are not part of the statutory planning system, but are very important ringmaster roles, bringing together all these different things around sustainable growth. And they're developed by growth boards or whatever a new strategic body might look like at the right level. But they would have a very specific role in terms of advising government on things like spatial distribution, long-term visions for areas, housing distribution, housing targets, as well as other things. And they would also be a real clear mechanism for any government funding. So whether you're talking about housing and infrastructure funding, growth funding, or whatever, it would be linked very much to how local authorities are doing in terms of their delivering on their new powers around sustainable development. And then bringing all that together, they would be accompanied by 10-year rolling delivery plans. So the vision, the framework, as Mike said, would not stay static, but that's the bit you wouldn't expect to have to review every 2-5 years or whatever. It would be the long-term vision, the point at where everybody is aiming for. And they would be done, again, as Sara said, it's not just about planning and planners, it's about all the different players that have a role to play in this, and have money to spend in supporting sustainable growth, and that's really important. So the delivery plan would be where that alignment in terms of investment priorities and investment around infrastructure and different things happens, and that would be a rolling plan. So it would be constantly reviewed, it'd be constantly checked back against sustainability, sustainable development powers, and the different sort of objectives around that. A lot of this must be outcome focused. It's about an end game. We've got to be clear about what we're trying to achieve and the route map to get there. And the route map is the bit that changes, not the end game.
Yeah, that's great stuff, Catriona. Thank you very much indeed. Panel, you have reflected our audience. No one disagrees with you. The vast majority of viewers are saying that you've reflected their feelings very well on the positive, the negative, and what should be added. So congratulations and well done, and fingers crossed for a warm welcome for your recommendations in Whitehall. And I want to take this opportunity. Catriona, you've had the last word once again. An hour and 10 minutes has flashed by in your compelling company. And we've got to go. Our time here is at an end. The conversation about the white paper must finish somewhere. So let's finish it here. Panel, you've been really, really generous to take the time to share your responses to government with us today. It's very much appreciated. You've never been busier. Thank you so much for taking the time. And on behalf of our viewers, I'll take this opportunity to thank you, Mike Kiely, the planner of the Planning Officers Society, and thank you Sara Whelan of the Planning Officers Society and Decorum Council, and thank you Catriona Riddell of Catriona Riddell Associates on behalf of the County Councils Network, and thank you Dr. Janice Morphet from the Bartlett School of Planning at UCL, and thank you Radsford Stewart of Stewart Management of Planning Solutions and the BAME Planners Network. On behalf of our panel, thank you out there, our viewers. We've got a bundle of your questions left hanging, and I'm going to take a cheeky liberty and forward the ones that I think haven't really been covered in the discussion, and let them have a crack at them if they so desire. And we'll circulate any of their responses through the LinkedIn Members Network, so that you can continue the discussion into the early hours if you so choose. We're going to be back on Thursday at 11 a.m. with our session Rewinding to High Streets and Town Centres, to ask how recovery and revitalisation efforts are faring. And you can register for that and watch the video of this session and all our other sessions on the voiceofauthority.co.uk. If you'd like to get involved in any of these sessions as a sponsor or a speaker, please email me at toby@3fox.co.uk. Meanwhile, from our panel, from me, and from everyone at 3Fox, good afternoon.